The briefcase sat on our kitchen counter like a loaded weapon, and I had no idea I was about to pull the trigger on my own marriage. My name is Tom Mitchell, and I've been fixing broken things for 23 years. First as a maintenance supervisor at Lincoln Elementary, now overseeing facilities for the entire district. Pipes, boilers, playground equipment, you name it. If it's busted, I can usually figure out how to make it work again. But marriages, that's supposed to be my wife's department. Jenna Ardell, she kept her maiden name for professional reasons, built her reputation as the go-to marriage counselor in our little corner of New England. Couples drove from 3 towns over to sit in her converted Victorian office, spilling their secrets while she nodded thoughtfully and dispensed wisdom at $200 an hour. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who fixed other people's relationships was systematically destroying her own. It was a Tuesday night in October when everything changed. Jenna had called around 6 to say she'd be working late again, her 3rd emergency session that week. I'd gotten used to eating dinner alone, watching Netflix reruns while her gourmet salmon grew cold in the oven. The briefcase wasn't unusual. Jenna always carried client files, session notes, professional journals. What was unusual was finding it unzipped on the counter, papers scattered like she'd been searching for something in a hurry. I wasn't snooping. Not intentionally. I was just cleaning up, stacking the papers into a neat pile when I saw it. A small black phone I'd never seen before, tucked between 2 manila folders. My hand shook as I picked it up. The screen lit up with a simple swipe, no password protection. The text messages were right there, a digital confession spanning months. Last night was incredible. When can we meet again? Your husband doesn't deserve you. I can't stop thinking about what you did during our session. The contact name read RT, but I knew exactly who that was. Reed Trenner. I'd met him at Jenna's office Christmas party 2 years ago. A soft-spoken guy going through a messy divorce, praising my wife for saving his sanity during the worst time of his life. Apparently, she'd saved more than his sanity. I scrolled through weeks of messages, my stomach churning with each revelation. There were photos, nothing explicit, but intimate enough. Dinner receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, hotel confirmations for conferences that didn't exist. But the worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was reading the timestamps. February 14th. While I was working a double shift to pay for her Valentine's Day spa weekend, she was texting another man about meeting at the Marriott. April 10th. Our anniversary dinner was canceled because of her family emergency. The same night she was asking Reed what room number he'd booked. June 22nd. My birthday. I'd spent it alone because she had a crisis intervention with a suicidal client. The messages showed her asking Reed to bring champagne to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. After 20 years of marriage, I'd realized I'd become the subject of my wife's private joke. The front door opened with its familiar squeak, another thing on my endless repair list. "Tom, I'm home." Jenna's voice carried that practiced cheerfulness she used with difficult clients. "Sorry I'm so late. Mrs. Henderson had a complete breakdown during our session." I looked at the phone, then at the briefcase, then at my wife as she walked into the kitchen. She was beautiful, still the same woman I'd fallen in love with in college. Auburn hair, green eyes, that confident smile that made everyone trust her instantly. "How was Mrs. Henderson?" I asked quietly. "Oh, you know, marriage troubles. Her husband's been distant lately, and she's starting to suspect he's having an affair." Jenna kissed my cheek, her perfume mixing with an unfamiliar cologne. It's heartbreaking how these things destroy families. The audacity was breathtaking. She was describing her own crimes while playing the sympathetic counselor. "That is heartbreaking," I agreed, watching her face carefully. "What do you usually tell clients in that situation?" "Well, communication is key. Honesty, trust." She started unpacking her briefcase, not noticing the phone was missing from its hiding spot. "Without those foundations, a marriage can't survive." I held up the burner phone. "Like this kind of honesty?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. For 10 seconds, we stared at each other across our granite countertop, the same counter we'd picked out together when we renovated the kitchen 5 years ago, back when I still believed we were building something permanent. Tom, I can explain. Can you? Because I've been reading your explanations for the past hour. Very detailed explanations. RT. Seems like a lucky guy. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. That's private property. It was in our kitchen, in your work briefcase, the same briefcase you've been bringing home for 2 years knowing I might see it. I scrolled through the messages again, reading timestamps aloud. February 14th, April 10th, June 22nd. Ring any bells? You don't understand the situation. I understand that you've been sleeping with your client while charging him $200 an hour for therapy sessions. I understand that you've been lying to me for at least 8 months, probably longer. I understand that while I've been working overtime to pay for your professional development conferences, you've been using them as romantic getaways. Jenna's professional composure cracked. It's not what you think. Reed was in a very vulnerable place, and sometimes the therapeutic relationship. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't you dare use your therapy speak on me. I've lived with you for 20 years. I know the difference between Dr. Jenna Ardell, marriage counselor, and Jenna, my wife, who's been cheating on me with a client. She tried a different approach, moving closer with that soft smile she used when she wanted something. Tommy, we can work through this. Couples overcome infidelity all the time. I can recommend an excellent therapist. You want to recommend a therapist? To fix the marriage you broke by sleeping with one of your clients? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The professional irony is incredible. Do you bill Reed for the affair, or is that included in his therapy package? Don't be crude. Crude? I'm just trying to understand your business model. You counsel couples about trust and communication while actively betraying both with a paying client. That's not crude. That's fraud. Jenna's mask finally slipped completely. You think you're so clever, don't you? The noble maintenance man, fixing everyone else's problems while his own life falls apart. When was the last time you tried to fix us, Tom? When was the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of a roommate? When was the last time you came home for dinner? When was the last time you didn't have an emergency session or a conference or a crisis intervention that coincidentally happened on every holiday and anniversary? My career is important. Your career is sleeping with vulnerable clients who trust you to help them through the worst periods of their lives. That's not a career, Jenna. That's predation with a professional license. She slapped me. Hard. The sound echoed through our kitchen like a gunshot. I touched my cheek, feeling the sting, and something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. Something much more dangerous. Clarity. Feel better? I asked calmly. Tom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean— Yes, you did. Just like you meant every text message, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye and told me you were helping people while you were actually helping yourself to your clients. I picked up the phone and her briefcase. I'm going to my workshop. Don't follow me. Don't try to explain. Don't use your therapeutic techniques to manipulate me into forgiveness. Just don't. What are you going to do? I paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at the woman I'd loved for half my life. I'm going to fix something that's broken. It's what I do. The workshop behind our house had always been my sanctuary. Pegboard walls lined with tools, a sturdy workbench my father built, coffee cans full of screws and bolts organized by size. Everything in its place, everything serving a purpose. I spread Jenna's papers across the workbench like blueprints. Session notes, appointment schedules, billing records. Her handwriting was neat, professional, documenting her own crimes with meticulous detail. The burner phone contained months of evidence, photos, messages, location data. But it was the session notes that made my stomach turn. I could see the pattern, how she'd identified vulnerable male clients, gradually shifted boundaries, used her professional authority to manipulate them into emotional and physical relationships. Reed wasn't the only one. There were at least 2 other names in her notes, marked with discrete symbols I was beginning to recognize. Dr. Jenna Ardell hadn't just had an affair, she'd turned her therapy practice into a hunting ground. I opened my laptop and started typing. If Jenna wanted to play games with professional ethics, I'd show her how the game was supposed to end. The Massachusetts Board of Registration of Allied Mental Health and Human Services Professions had very clear guidelines about therapist-client relationships. I'd spent the last 3 hours reading every regulation, every disciplinary action, every case study of professionals who'd crossed these boundaries. The consequences were severe. License revocation, criminal charges, civil liability, professional ruin. I looked at the evidence spread across my workbench, phone records, session notes, billing statements that showed she'd been charging clients for the time she spent seducing them. Everything documented in her own handwriting, time-stamped and cross-referenced. Jenna had always been thorough. It was going to destroy her. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Tom, please come inside. We need to talk about this rationally." I turned off the phone and went back to work. There would be plenty of time for rational conversation later, in a hearing room, with a state investigator taking notes. For now, I had something broken that needed fixing, and unlike my marriage, this was something I could actually repair. Dawn was breaking over our neighborhood when I finally finished documenting everything. My workshop looked like a detective's evidence room, photos pinned to the pegboard, printed emails organized by date, session transcripts arranged in chronological order. The pattern was even worse than I'd initially realized. Jenna's client files read like a predator's playbook. She specifically targeted men going through divorces, recent widowers, anyone experiencing relationship trauma. Her session notes showed how she'd gradually shifted from professional counseling to personal confidant to something much darker. Client exhibits strong attachment behaviors, she'd written about Reed Trenner. Responds well to physical comfort and boundary flexibility. Recommend extending session length and increasing frequency of contact. What she'd actually recommended, based on the phone records, was meeting him at hotels twice a week. I found similar notes for David Kowalski, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer. Client struggling with intimacy issues and guilt about moving forward. Therapeutic touch and emotional validation showing positive results. The timestamps on David's file coincided with a weekend I'd spent alone while Jenna attended a grief counseling seminar in Boston. The hotel receipts in her briefcase showed she'd never left town. Then there was Marcus Webb. Yes, she'd been busy. His file was marked Confidential Boundary Issues in red ink. The notes described a man whose wife had left him for his best friend, someone seeking validation and struggling with trust. Jenna's treatment plan involved intensive one-on-one sessions to rebuild confidence and self-worth. The burner phone showed exactly how she'd been rebuilding his confidence. The messages were more explicit than Reed's, spanning nearly a year. Marcus had been her longest-running victim. I sat back in my workshop chair, staring at the evidence. 3 men, maybe more, all of them paying her to fix their broken hearts while she systematically exploited their vulnerability, all of them trusting her with their deepest fears and traumas while she used that information to manipulate them into affairs. The worst part was reading her session notes about our own marriage. She'd been documenting our problems like a case study, analyzing my reactions and responses with clinical detachment. Subject shows classic signs of emotional neglect and abandonment issues. Responds to withdrawal with increased compliance and caretaking behaviors. Subject. She'd been referring to her own husband as a research subject. I'd become the control group in her experiment with infidelity. My phone had been buzzing all night with messages from Jenna, progressing from apologetic to angry to desperate. I finally turned it on to find 17 missed calls and a series of texts that revealed more about her mindset than any therapy session. Tom, please answer. We can fix this. You're being irrational. Let's discuss this like adults. I know you're upset, but destroying our marriage won't solve anything. Your behavior is concerning. Maybe you should talk to someone. If you don't respond soon, I'm calling Dr. Peterson. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to flip the script. I was the one having a breakdown. I was the one being irrational. I was the one who needed professional help. It was textbook manipulation, and I'd been falling for it for years. I made coffee and started reading through her appointment books, cross-referencing dates with our personal calendar. The pattern was staggering. Every anniversary, every birthday, every holiday I'd spent alone, she'd been with one of her clients, billing them for the privilege of her company. Our 15th wedding anniversary. I'd planned a romantic dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. She'd canceled 2 hours before, claiming a suicidal client needed emergency intervention. The appointment book showed a 3-hour session with Marcus Webb, billed at double her usual rate for crisis counseling. My 40th birthday. She'd forgotten entirely, working late on what she called a complex case requiring intensive support. The phone records showed her texting David Kowalski about meeting at his apartment, bringing wine to celebrate his breakthrough. Last Christmas morning. While I was making breakfast and wrapping the presents she'd been too busy to buy, she was texting Reed about their New Year's plans, complaining that she had to pretend to be happy with her family obligations. 20 years of marriage reduced to family obligations. I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside my workshop. Jenna appeared in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her professional composure completely gone. Tom, this has gone far enough. You can't stay out here forever. I'm not hiding, Jenna. I'm working. She saw the papers spread across my workbench and went pale. You had no right to go through my client files. That's confidential information. Confidential? You left everything in an unlocked briefcase in our kitchen, and half of this isn't client information, it's evidence of criminal activity. Criminal activity? Don't be dramatic. I held up her session notes for Reed Trenner. Contact between a therapist and client is a felony in Massachusetts. It's also grounds for immediate license revocation, criminal charges, and civil liability. You didn't just cheat on me, Jenna. You committed crimes against vulnerable people who trusted you. Those men aren't victims. They're consenting adults who were paying you for professional mental health services, who came to you during the worst periods of their lives, trusting you to help them heal, who had no idea that their therapist was systematically exploiting their vulnerability for personal gratification. She tried to grab the papers, but I blocked her. This stops now, Tom. Whatever you're planning, it stops. What I'm planning is holding you accountable for what you've done, to me, to your clients, to your profession. You'll destroy both our lives. You already destroyed our life. I'm just documenting the damage. Jenna's mask slipped again, revealing something ugly underneath. You think you're the hero in this story? The noble husband fighting for justice? You're pathetic, Tom. You've always been pathetic. A maintenance worker married to a successful professional, living in a house you could never afford, driving a car I bought, taking vacations I paid for. With money you earned by exploiting mentally ill clients. With money I earned by building a successful practice while you fixed toilets and changed light bulbs. Do you know what it's like being married to someone with no ambition, no drive, no interest in anything beyond your little workshop and your little job? The words stung because they echoed my own insecurities, fears I'd shared with her during vulnerable moments, late-night conversations, when I'd wondered if I was holding her back. She'd comforted me then, assured me that success wasn't measured by income or status. Now I realized she'd been taking notes. Is that what you told your clients? That their wives didn't appreciate them? That they deserved better? That someone finally understood their worth? I gave those men something they weren't getting at home. You gave them a fantasy while charging them $200 an hour for therapy they desperately needed. You took advantage of their trauma for your own gratification, then sent them home to deal with the consequences while you came home to me. At least they appreciated what I offered. What you offered was a lie, a professional violating her oath, a wife betraying her marriage, a predator exploiting vulnerable people. That's not appreciation, Jenna. That's manipulation. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Not fear of losing our marriage, but fear of losing everything else. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you to understand what you've done. To me, to them, to everyone who trusted you. And then what? We go to counseling? We work through this? We rebuild our marriage? I looked at the evidence spread across my workbench, then back at my wife. No, Jenna. Then you face the consequences. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing across the gravel. I watched through the window as she went back into the house, probably to start damage control. But it was too late for damage control. I'd spent the night learning everything I needed to know about professional ethics violations, and I had everything I needed to prove her crimes. I opened my laptop and started typing a new document. Not angry accusations or emotional outbursts, but a careful, detailed clinical report of professional misconduct. The kind of document that would land on a state investigator's desk and trigger an immediate investigation. Jenna had always said that reputation was everything in her profession. She was about to learn exactly what that meant. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of careful preparation. I'd called in sick to work, the first time I'd used a personal day in 3 years, and devoted myself entirely to building an airtight case against my wife. My workshop had transformed into a command center. I'd installed a small scanner to digitize everything, created encrypted backup files, and organized the evidence into categories that would make sense to a state investigator. Financial records showing billing irregularities, session notes documenting boundary violations, phone records proving personal contact outside professional hours, hotel receipts and restaurant charges that coincided with client appointments. But the most damaging evidence was in Jenna's own handwriting. Detailed notes describing her therapeutic techniques that were clearly in nature, her assessment of which clients were most vulnerable to manipulation, and her long-term strategy for maintaining multiple relationships without detection. She'd documented her own crimes with scientific precision. I'd also been researching the men she'd victimized. Reed Trenner was a local contractor whose wife had left him for his business partner. David Kowalski was a high school teacher whose wife had died of breast cancer 2 years ago. Marcus Webb was a software engineer whose marriage had imploded when he discovered his wife's gambling addiction. All of them had come to Jenna during the worst periods of their lives, seeking professional help to process trauma and rebuild their emotional health. Instead, they'd found a predator who'd exploited their vulnerability for personal gain. The legal implications were staggering. In Massachusetts, contact between a therapist and client was classified as rape, regardless of apparent consent. The power dynamic made genuine consent impossible. Jenna could face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and automatic license revocation. But first, I needed to document everything properly. I'd been avoiding Jenna since our confrontation, sleeping in the workshop and leaving early each morning before she woke up. She'd tried calling, texting, even leaving notes on my truck windshield, but I wasn't ready for another manipulation session. On Thursday morning, I found her waiting in the kitchen with coffee and what looked like a prepared speech. Tom, we need to talk rationally about this situation. There's nothing rational about what you've done. I've made mistakes, I acknowledge that, but destroying both our lives won't fix anything. I poured my own coffee, noting that she'd used my favorite mug, a small gesture designed to remind me of better times. Even now, she was working angles. I'm not destroying anything, Jenna. I'm documenting what you've already destroyed. The state board investigation will ruin my career. Your career was built on exploiting vulnerable clients. Maybe it should be ruined. She tried a different approach, moving closer with that soft voice she used for difficult clients. I know you're hurt, betrayed, angry. Those are normal responses to infidelity, and we can work through them together. Don't. Don't what? Don't use your therapy voice on me. Don't analyze my emotional responses like I'm one of your clients. Don't pretend this is a normal case of infidelity that can be resolved with couples counseling. Then what do you want? Divorce? Fine. We'll divide the assets, sell the house, go our separate ways. But involving the state board will destroy everything we've built together. Everything we built together was paid for with money you earned by committing crimes against people who trusted you. The house, the cars, the vacations, your professional reputation, all of it was funded by exploitation. You're being self-righteous. I'm being accurate. Jenna's composure cracked again. You think you're protecting those men? You think they'll thank you for exposing their private business? Reed has a construction company. What happens to his reputation when everyone knows he was sleeping with his therapist? David teaches high school. How does this affect his career? Marcus works for a tech company that does government contracts. What happens when his security clearance gets reviewed? It was a good point, and she knew it. Exposing her crimes would inevitably expose her victims, potentially destroying their lives along with hers. That's not my responsibility, I said finally. You created this situation when you decided to exploit vulnerable clients. The consequences are yours to own. The consequences will destroy innocent people. The innocent people were already destroyed when you manipulated them into relationships while they were paying you for professional help. I'm not creating victims, Jenna. I'm just refusing to help you cover up the ones you've already created. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating different approaches. The apologetic wife hadn't worked. The rational professional hadn't worked. The concerned advocate for her victims hadn't worked. What if I stop? She asked quietly. What if I end all contact with those clients, refer them to other therapists, and focus on rebuilding our marriage? You mean, what if you stop committing crimes long enough for the statute of limitations to run out? I mean, what if I get help? Professional help. What if I acknowledge that I have boundary issues and commit to addressing them? Boundary issues? You systematically exploited vulnerable clients for gratification while charging them for therapy. That's not a boundary issue. That's criminal predation. I'm trying to find a solution that doesn't destroy everyone involved. There is no solution, Jenna. There are only consequences. You made choices, and now those choices have results. I finished my coffee and headed for the door. I'm filing a complaint with the state board this morning. You might want to call a lawyer. Tom, please, 20 years, I said, turning back to look at her. 20 years I trusted you completely, supported your career, defended your long hours, believed your explanations for every canceled dinner and missed anniversary. 20 years I thought I was married to an ethical professional who helped people heal from trauma. You were married to someone who made mistakes. I was married to someone who committed crimes. There's a difference. I left her standing in our kitchen and drove to the post office, where I'd prepared a certified mail package for the Massachusetts Board of Registration. 30 pages of evidence, cross-referenced and documented, with a cover letter that laid out the charges in clinical detail. Contact with multiple clients, billing fraud, exploitation of vulnerable populations, violation of professional ethics codes. The package was addressed to Ms. Sarah Bouchard, Senior Investigator, Professional Misconduct Division. I'd researched her background, 15 years investigating therapist misconduct, a reputation for thoroughness, and a track record of successful prosecutions. As I handed the package to the postal clerk, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For 3 days, I'd been carrying the weight of Jenna's crimes, trying to decide what to do with information that could destroy multiple lives. Now it was out of my hands. The evidence was in the mail, and the consequences would follow their own timeline. I drove home to find Jenna's car gone and a note on the kitchen counter. Staying at Maya's for a few days. Please don't do anything else until we can talk with a mediator. Maya Fernandez was Jenna's best friend and biggest enabler, a divorced real estate agent who'd spent years encouraging Jenna to prioritize her own needs and not settle for less than she deserved. If Jenna was seeking refuge with Maya, she was probably planning a counterattack. I went back to my workshop and continued documenting everything. The state investigation would be thorough, but I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. 3 days later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mr. Mitchell, this is Sarah Bouchard from the Massachusetts Board of Registration. I received your complaint regarding Dr. Jenna Ardell, and I'd like to schedule an interview to discuss the evidence you've provided. How soon can we meet? Are you available this afternoon? This is a serious matter, and we need to begin our investigation immediately. I looked around my workshop, at the evidence I'd spent a week organizing, at the life I'd spent 20 years building with a woman who'd been systematically betraying everything I thought we stood for. I'll be there in an hour. Sarah Bouchard's office was exactly what I'd expected. Institutional furniture, fluorescent lighting, and filing cabinets that probably contained the professional demise of dozens of licensed therapists. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe early 40s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why Jenna was probably panicking. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation. This is one of the most comprehensive misconduct reports I've received in 15 years of investigations. My wife is very thorough. She documented everything. Yes, I noticed that. It's unusual for someone to create such detailed records of their own ethical violations. Bouchard opened a thick folder containing copies of everything I'd submitted. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that you obtained this evidence legally. Everything was in an unlocked briefcase in our kitchen. The phone was lying on our counter. The files were scattered across the surface. I wasn't searching through locked drawers or breaking into password-protected accounts. And you're prepared to testify under oath about how you obtained this information? Absolutely. She made notes on a legal pad, then looked up with an expression that was professionally neutral but somehow conveyed sympathy. Mr. Mitchell, I want you to understand what happens next. Once we open a formal investigation, there's no stopping the process. Dr. Ardell will be notified, her clients will be contacted, and the details will become part of the public record. I understand. This will also likely end your marriage, regardless of the investigation's outcome. My marriage ended when I found that phone. This is about holding her accountable for crimes against vulnerable people. Bouchard nodded and made more notes. Let's go through the evidence systematically. You've identified 3 clients with whom Dr. Ardell appears to have had relationships: Reed Trenner, David Kowalski, and Marcus Webb. Can you walk me through the timeline for each relationship? For the next 2 hours, we reviewed everything: phone records, session notes, billing irregularities, hotel receipts. Bouchard asked detailed questions about dates, locations, and the overlap between professional appointments and personal contact. The pattern is consistent with predatory behavior, she said finally. Dr. Ardell appears to have specifically targeted vulnerable male clients, gradually violated professional boundaries, and maintained multiple simultaneous relationships while continuing to bill for therapy services. How long does the investigation usually take? That depends on cooperation from the subjects and witnesses. In cases this clear-cut with this much documentation, we can move quickly. I'll be contacting Dr. Ardell tomorrow to schedule her interview. What should I expect? She'll probably hire an attorney. They'll likely argue that the relationships were consensual and occurred between adults. They might claim the contact happened after the therapeutic relationship ended, though your evidence suggests otherwise. Will the clients be contacted? Yes, they're both victims and witnesses. We'll need their testimony to establish the timeline and nature of the therapeutic relationships. I thought about Reed, David, and Marcus, 3 men who'd sought professional help during personal crises and instead found themselves manipulated into affairs with their therapist. They were going to be humiliated, but they were also going to learn the truth about what had been done to them. Mr. Mitchell, there's something else you should know. Cases like this often involve civil lawsuits. The clients may sue Dr. Ardell for malpractice, and you may have grounds for a lawsuit as well. I don't want money. I want accountability. I understand. But you should be prepared for the possibility that this becomes a very public, very messy legal battle. I left Bouchard's office feeling like I'd just set something irreversible in motion. The evidence was now part of an official investigation, and Jenna's professional life was about to implode. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Tom, Jenna is devastated. She knows she made mistakes, but this is going too far. Can we meet and talk about this rationally? I deleted the message without responding. Maya had been encouraging Jenna's self-actualization for years, probably knowing about the affairs and framing them as empowerment. She was part of the problem, not part of the solution. That evening, I was eating a quiet dinner when my phone rang. Jenna's number. Tom, I know what you did. Sarah Bouchard called this morning. Good. Then you know there's no point in more manipulation. This isn't manipulation. This is me begging you to reconsider. Do you understand what you've done? My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. Everything I've worked for is gone. Everything you worked for was built on exploiting vulnerable clients. Maybe it should be gone. What about the innocent people who will be hurt? What about Reed's business? David's teaching career? Marcus's security clearance? What about the innocent people who were already hurt when you manipulated them into relationships while they were paying you for professional therapy? They weren't innocent victims, Tom. They were willing participants in adult relationships. They were clients who trusted you to help them heal from trauma. You exploited that trust for personal gratification while charging them for services you weren't providing. I was providing services. I was helping them rebuild their confidence and self-worth. You were using your professional authority to manipulate vulnerable people into relationships. That's not therapy. That's predation. There was a long pause, and when Jenna spoke again, her voice had changed. The pleading tone was gone, replaced by something colder. You're going to regret this, Tom. You think you're the hero, but you're just a bitter husband destroying lives out of spite. I'm a man who found evidence of crimes and reported them to the appropriate authorities. Everything else is consequences. Consequences for everyone except you, right? You get to be the righteous whistleblower while everyone else pays the price. I'm paying a price too, Jenna. I'm losing a marriage I thought was real, finding out that 20 years of my life were built on lies, discovering that the woman I loved was systematically exploiting people who trusted her. At least you'll have your moral superiority to keep you warm at night. At least I'll have my integrity. She hung up, and I sat in our empty kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been a lie. The house was too quiet, too clean, too full of memories that I now understood differently. The next morning brought the first sign that word was spreading. Mrs. Patterson, from across the street, knocked on my door with a concerned expression and a casserole dish. Tom, dear, I heard there might be some trouble with Jenna's practice. Is everything all right? News traveled fast in our neighborhood, especially when it involved professional scandal. I thanked Mrs. Patterson for the casserole and gave her a carefully neutral response, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. By afternoon, my phone was ringing with calls from mutual friends, colleagues, and family members who'd heard rumors. I let most of them go to voicemail, not ready to explain the situation to people who'd known us as a successful couple. The one call I did answer came from Jake Morrison, my closest friend and former co-worker who'd left the school district to start his own handyman business. Tom, what the heck is going on? Linda heard from someone at the grocery store that Jenna's in some kind of trouble with the state. It's complicated, Jake. Complicated how? Are you guys getting divorced? Among other things. You want to talk about it? I can bring beer and pizza, and we can figure out what you need." For the first time in a week, I felt genuinely grateful. Jake was straightforward, loyal, and completely without agenda. If I was going to talk to anyone about what was happening, it would be him. "Come over around 7, and Jake, bring a lot of beer." That evening, sitting in my workshop with Jake and a six-pack of Sam Adams, I told the whole story. Jake listened without interruption, occasionally shaking his head or muttering under his breath. "So let me get this straight," he said finally. "Jenna was sleeping with multiple clients, billing them for the privilege and documenting everything in her files?" "That's the simplified version." "And you found all this evidence because she left it sitting on your kitchen counter?" "Essentially, yes. Tom, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you do anything vindictive or cruel. But this woman destroyed your marriage while committing crimes against people who trusted her. You did the right thing." "It doesn't feel right. It feels like I've blown up multiple lives." "She blew up multiple lives. You just refused to help her cover it up." Jake was right, but it didn't make the situation easier. In 3 days, I'd gone from believing I had a successful marriage to filing a complaint that would destroy my wife's career and expose her victims to public humiliation. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "The investigation continues. Jenna gets interviewed, the clients get contacted, eventually there's a hearing." "And then?" "Then she loses her license, probably faces criminal charges, and everyone learns what really happened." "Good," Jake said firmly. "Actions have consequences. She made her choices." I hoped he was right, because there was no going back now. The cascade had started, and it wouldn't stop until everything was exposed. 2 weeks after filing the complaint, I was replacing a broken window in the elementary school gymnasium when my phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Bouchard. "Mr. Mitchell, we've completed the initial interviews with Dr. Ardell and the 3 clients you identified. I wanted to update you on our findings." I stepped outside into the crisp November air, away from the noise of power tools and curious coworkers. "What did you learn?" "All 3 men have confirmed relationships with Dr. Ardell during the period they were receiving therapy services. The timeline matches your documentation exactly." "How did they react?" "That's complicated. Mr. Trenner is cooperative but embarrassed. He genuinely believed the relationship was consensual and special. Mr. Kowalski is angry. He feels manipulated and betrayed. Mr. Webb is defensive and initially tried to protect Dr. Ardell, though he's beginning to understand the ethical violations involved." "What about Jenna's interview?" "Dr. Ardell was accompanied by an attorney. She's claiming the relationships were consensual and occurred between therapy sessions, not during professional contact. Her lawyer is arguing that no laws were broken. But the phone records show contact during billed session times." "Exactly. Her own documentation contradicts her testimony. We're moving forward with formal charges." "What kind of charges?" "Professional misconduct, violation of ethical standards, and exploitation of clients. The criminal charges will be filed separately by the district attorney's office." Criminal charges. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. Jenna was going to be arrested, prosecuted, possibly imprisoned. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 20 years was going to be treated as a criminal. "Mr. Mitchell, there's something else. Dr. Ardell's attorney has indicated they may file a complaint against you for invasion of privacy and theft of confidential client information." "Can they do that?" "They can try, but since the evidence was obtained legally from your shared residence, and since you're reporting suspected criminal activity, you're protected by whistleblower statutes." "When will the formal hearing be scheduled?" "Probably within the next month. You'll be called as a witness, along with the 3 clients. The hearing is open to the public, so there will likely be media attention." Media attention. I hadn't considered that possibility. Our small city had a weekly newspaper and a local news blog that covered everything from school board meetings to restaurant openings. A licensed therapist accused of exploiting clients would be front-page news. Is there anything else I should know? Dr. Ardell has been ordered to cease all professional practice pending the investigation. Her office is closed, and she's been instructed to refer all current clients to other providers. After ending the call, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching elementary school kids play during recess. Their laughter and shouting seemed to come from a different world, one where adults were trustworthy, where professionals helped people instead of exploiting them, where marriages meant something. That evening, I was grilling a burger on my back deck when I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. Reed Trenner climbed out, looking nervous and uncomfortable. I'd met him a few times at Jenna's office events. A decent-looking guy in his early 40s, polite and soft-spoken, the kind of person you'd trust with your house keys or your personal problems. "Tom, I hope it's okay that I came by. I got your address from the phone book." "It's fine, Reed. You want a beer?" "That would be great." I grabbed 2 bottles from the cooler and gestured toward the patio chairs. Reed sat heavily, running his hands through his hair. "I guess you know why I'm here." "The state investigation." "Yeah, that investigator Bouchard, she explained things I never understood before, about power dynamics and professional boundaries and other stuff. How are you handling it?" Reed took a long drink before answering. "Honestly, I'm embarrassed and angry and confused as heck." He looked at me directly for the first time. I thought what Jenna and I had was real, special. She made me feel like I mattered after my wife left. That was her job, Reed. Making you feel like you mattered. That's what therapists do. Help people rebuild their self-worth after trauma. But she did more than that. She listened to me, understood me, made me feel like a man again after my wife destroyed my confidence. She exploited your vulnerability for her own gratification, while charging you $200 an hour for therapy you weren't receiving. Reed was quiet for a moment. The investigator said the same thing, that I couldn't really consent because of the power dynamic. That Jenna was in a position of authority, and I was in a vulnerable state. Do you believe that? I'm starting to. Looking back, I can see how she gradually shifted things, started with longer sessions, then personal conversations, then physical contact. She said it was all part of helping me heal. But it wasn't healing. It was manipulation. Yeah, I'm figuring that out. Reed finished his beer and stared across my backyard. My ex-wife heard about the investigation. She's threatening to use it in our custody battle, saying I'm unstable and made poor decisions. I'm sorry, Reed. I know this is hard. Are you? Sorry, I mean. You're the one who reported Jenna. The question hung in the air between us. Was I sorry? Sorry that Reed was facing public humiliation and custody problems? Sorry that David Kowalski might lose his teaching job? Sorry that Marcus Webb's security clearance was under review? I'm sorry you were victimized by someone you trusted, I said finally. I'm sorry you're facing consequences for something that was done to you. But I'm not sorry that Jenna is being held accountable for exploiting vulnerable clients. Reed nodded slowly. The investigator said there might be civil lawsuits, that we could sue Jenna for malpractice. Are you considering it? I don't know. Part of me wants to put this behind me and move on, but part of me is angry that she used my pain to get what she wanted. That's your decision to make. What about you? Are you going to sue her? I'd been avoiding that question for weeks. Legally, I probably had grounds for a lawsuit, alienation of affection, emotional distress, maybe fraud for using marital assets to fund her affairs. I just want her to face consequences for what she did. The money doesn't matter. Reed stood to leave, then turned back. Tom, I want you to know that I never intended to break up your marriage. I thought she was unhappy with you and that what we had was separate from that. She told you I was a bad husband? She said you didn't understand her professional needs, that you were threatened by her success and tried to hold her back. Another manipulation. Jenna had been telling her victims that I was the problem, that I didn't appreciate her or support her career. She'd turned me into the villain in their romantic narrative. For what it's worth, Reed continued, she was wrong. From what I can see, you supported her career completely. This house, her office, her conferences, you made it all possible. Yeah, well, I supported what I thought was her career. Turns out I was funding something else entirely. After Reed left, I called Jake and asked him to come over. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't emotionally invested in the situation, someone who could help me think through what was happening. So one of the clients came by? Jake asked, settling into a patio chair with a beer. Reed Trenner, the contractor. He's struggling with understanding what happened to him. What do you mean? He thought the relationship with Jenna was real, consensual, special. He's having trouble accepting that he was manipulated. That's what predators do, right? They make their victims feel special and chosen. Yeah, but these weren't children, Jake. They were adult men who made decisions. Adult men who were paying a licensed professional for mental health services during personal crises. Men who trusted her to help them heal, not exploit their vulnerability. Jake was right, but the situation felt more complicated than that. Reed, David, and Marcus had all participated willingly in the affairs. They'd met Jenna at hotels, sent romantic texts, kept the relationship secret. At what point did victimization become complicity? You're overthinking this, Jake said, reading my expression. Jenna was the professional. She was the one with training in psychology and ethics. She was the one getting paid to provide therapeutic services. The responsibility was entirely hers. But the consequences are falling on everyone. The consequences are falling on the people who were harmed by her actions. That includes you, Tom. You were victimized too. I'd been so focused on Jenna's clients that I hadn't really considered myself a victim. But Jake was right. I'd been betrayed, lied to, manipulated. My marriage had been destroyed by someone who'd taken vows to love and honor me. What happens at the hearing? Jake asked. I testify about finding the evidence. The clients testify about their relationships with Jenna. The board makes a decision about her license. And then? Then she faces the consequences of her choices. Good, Jake said firmly. It's about time. As we sat on my deck, drinking beer and watching the sun set over our neighborhood, I thought about consequences and accountability and the difference between justice and revenge. I wasn't seeking revenge against Jenna. I was seeking justice for the people she'd harmed, including myself. There was a difference, even if the results looked the same. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th. In 3 weeks, everything would be exposed, and everyone would learn the truth about Dr. Jenna Ardell's therapeutic practice. I was ready for that truth, even if nobody else was. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired, folding chairs arranged in rows, a long table for the board members, and a witness chair that looked like it belonged in a courtroom drama. I arrived early and took a seat in the back, watching as people filed in. Sarah Bouchard with her stack of evidence folders, Jenna with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she charged $500 an hour, Reed, David, and Marcus, all sitting separately and avoiding eye contact with each other. Local reporters with notepads and cameras, curious neighbors who'd seen the story in the weekly paper, other therapists, probably wondering if their own boundary violations might be exposed next. Jenna looked smaller than I remembered, wearing a conservative blue suit and minimal makeup. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman I'd loved for 20 years. Then I remembered the phone messages, the session notes, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable clients, and the sympathy disappeared. All rise for the Massachusetts Board of Registration of Allied Mental Health and Human Services Professions. 5 board members filed in, led by Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a stern-looking woman in her 60s who'd been investigating professional misconduct for longer than I'd been married. We're here today to consider formal charges against Dr. Jenna Ardell, license number MH47291, for alleged violations of professional ethics and standards of practice. Dr. Ardell, you are represented by counsel? Yes, Your Honor. Attorney Rebecca Morrison representing Dr. Ardell. This is not a criminal proceeding, counselor. You may address me as Dr. Hendricks or chairwoman. I could see Attorney Morrison bristle at the correction, but she nodded professionally. The board will hear testimony regarding charges of exploitation of clients, violation of professional boundaries, and billing fraud. Ms. Bouchard, please present your opening statement. Sarah Bouchard stood and addressed the board with the kind of calm authority that made me understand why Jenna was probably terrified. Chairwoman Hendricks, members of the board, the evidence will show that Dr. Jenna Ardell systematically exploited vulnerable male clients for gratification over a period of approximately 2 years. She targeted men experiencing relationship trauma, gradually violated professional boundaries, and maintained relationships while continuing to bill for therapeutic services. She gestured toward the evidence table, where dozens of folders were organized by client and date. The evidence includes documentation in Dr. Ardell's own handwriting, phone records showing personal contact during billed session times, financial records proving billing irregularities, and testimony from 3 victims who trusted Dr. Ardell to help them heal from personal trauma. Dr. Ardell's attorney may present her opening statement. Rebecca Morrison stood, projecting confidence despite the mountain of evidence against her client. Chairwoman Hendricks, Dr. Jenna Ardell has devoted 15 years to helping people overcome relationship trauma and rebuild their emotional health. The relationships in question occurred between consenting adults outside the therapeutic setting. While Dr. Ardell acknowledges that her personal relationships may have created the appearance of impropriety, she categorically denies any criminal wrongdoing or deliberate exploitation. It was a weak defense, and everyone in the room knew it. The evidence was too clear, too detailed, too damaging. The board will now hear testimony from witnesses. Mr. Thomas Mitchell, please approach the witness chair. Walking to the front of the room felt like crossing a bridge I could never recross. Behind me was the life I'd built with Jenna, 20 years of shared memories and mutual support. Ahead was the truth about what that life had actually been. I was sworn in and took my seat, looking out at faces I recognized and others I didn't. Jenna was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read: anger, betrayal, desperation, or maybe just exhaustion. Mr. Mitchell, please tell the board how you obtained the evidence that led to this investigation. I described finding the burner phone, reading the messages, discovering the pattern of exploitation documented in Jenna's own files. Sarah Bouchard walked me through the timeline, the evidence, the overlap between professional appointments and personal relationships. Mr. Mitchell, did you have any suspicion that your wife was engaged in relationships with her clients? No. I trusted her completely. When she worked late or traveled for conferences, I assumed she was building her professional practice. I was proud of her success. How did you feel when you discovered the truth? Betrayed. Not just as a husband, but on behalf of the men who'd trusted her to help them heal from trauma. They came to her during the worst periods of their lives, and she exploited their vulnerability. Attorney Morrison cross-examined me, trying to establish that I'd invaded Jenna's privacy and violated client confidentiality. But the evidence had been obtained legally, and I was reporting suspected criminal activity. Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true that you filed this complaint out of anger about your wife's infidelity rather than concern for her clients? I filed this complaint because I discovered evidence of crimes against vulnerable people. My personal feelings about the infidelity are separate from my obligation to report professional misconduct. But you're seeking revenge against your wife for destroying your marriage. I'm seeking accountability for someone who exploited people who trusted her. The marriage was destroyed when she chose to commit crimes against her clients. Next came Reed Trenner, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit. He testified about his divorce, his emotional state when he first sought therapy, and the gradual shift from professional relationship to contact. Mr. Trenner, did you understand that contact with your therapist was unethical? Not at the time. Dr. Ardell explained that our connection was special, that she was helping me rebuild my confidence and self-worth. She said the physical contact was part of my healing process. How do you feel about the relationship now? Used. Manipulated. I trusted her to help me get through the worst time of my life, and she took advantage of that trust for her own gratification. David Kowalski's testimony was similar but more emotional. He'd lost his wife to cancer and sought therapy to process grief and guilt. Jenna had gradually convinced him that physical intimacy was part of learning to love again. She said my wife would want me to be happy, he testified, his voice breaking. She said the guilt I felt about moving forward was unhealthy and that she was helping me heal. I believed her because she was the professional. Marcus Webb was the most difficult witness. Even now, he seemed to believe that his relationship with Jenna had been genuine. Dr. Ardell understood me in ways my ex-wife never did. She helped me see that I deserved better, that I was worthy of love and respect. Mr. Webb, do you understand that Dr. Ardell was being paid to provide therapeutic services during the time you were having a relationship? She was providing therapeutic services. She helped me rebuild my self-esteem and confidence. Through contact, through understanding and acceptance and, yes, physical intimacy. But it wasn't exploitative, it was healing. Sarah Bouchard had to walk Marcus through the power dynamics, the ethical violations, the impossibility of genuine consent in a therapeutic relationship. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to acknowledge that he'd been manipulated. Finally, it was Jenna's turn to testify. She approached the witness chair with the same professional composure she'd used in couples therapy, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her voice was tighter than usual. Dr. Ardell, you are accused of exploitation of 3 clients over a 2-year period. How do you respond to these charges? I categorically deny any exploitation. The relationships in question were consensual and occurred between therapy sessions, not during professional contact. Dr. Ardell, the evidence includes phone records showing personal contact during build session times, session notes describing physical contact as therapeutic intervention, and your own documentation of boundary violations. How do you explain this evidence? The phone records show brief personal conversations that occurred after therapeutic work was completed. The session notes reflect my assessment that these clients needed emotional support beyond traditional talk therapy. Emotional support that included contact, physical intimacy that helped them rebuild confidence and self-worth after relationship trauma. It was painful to watch. Jenna was trying to reframe her crimes as innovative therapy, her exploitation as healing intervention. Even under oath, facing professional ruin, she couldn't acknowledge what she'd actually done. Sarah Bouchard methodically destroyed her testimony, walking through the evidence piece by piece, showing the pattern of predation, the billing fraud, the systematic violation of professional ethics. Dr. Ardell, you documented your own boundary violations in detailed session notes. You billed clients for time spent in relationships. You targeted vulnerable men experiencing relationship trauma and exploited their trust for personal gratification. How is this different from any other form of professional predation? I helped those men heal from trauma and rebuild their lives. You exploited their vulnerability while charging them for professional services they weren't receiving. I provided services that went beyond traditional therapy. You committed crimes against people who trusted you. The cross-examination went on for 2 hours, with Jenna becoming more defensive and less credible with each question. By the end, even her own attorney looked defeated. The board will recess to consider the evidence and testimony. We will reconvene in 1 hour to announce our decision. During the break, I stood outside the hearing room, watching Jenna huddle with her attorney. She looked broken, defeated. Nothing like the confident professional who'd built a successful practice over 15 years. Reed approached me, looking relieved that his testimony was over. "How do you think it went?" "I think the evidence speaks for itself." "Yeah." Listening to the other guys testify, hearing the investigator lay out the pattern, it's clear what she was doing. "How are you handling everything?" "Better than I expected. My ex-wife is still threatening to use this in our custody battle, but my lawyer thinks we can manage it. And honestly, understanding that I was manipulated makes me feel less guilty about the whole thing." David joined us, looking exhausted but somehow lighter. "I keep thinking about my wife," he said quietly. "What she would think about me getting involved with my therapist. But now I understand that it wasn't really my choice. Dr. Ardell used my grief to manipulate me into something I never would have chosen if I'd been thinking clearly." Marcus walked past without acknowledging us, still struggling to accept what had happened to him. "The board is reconvening. Please take your seats." Dr. Hendricks looked grim as she addressed the packed hearing room. "The board has reviewed the evidence and testimony regarding charges against Dr. Jenna Ardell. We find the evidence of professional misconduct to be overwhelming and undeniable." Jenna's shoulders sagged, and her attorney put a supportive hand on her arm. "Dr. Ardell systematically exploited vulnerable clients, violated fundamental ethical standards, and committed billing fraud. Her actions represent a profound betrayal of professional trust and have caused significant harm to the individuals who sought her help. Therefore, the board hereby revokes license MH47291, effective immediately. Dr. Ardell is prohibited from practicing therapy in Massachusetts or any other jurisdiction. This decision will be forwarded to the National Practitioner Data Bank and reported to licensing boards in all 50 states. Additionally, we are referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution and notifying Dr. Ardell's malpractice insurance carrier of our findings." It was over. 15 years of professional practice, destroyed in a single afternoon. Jenna's career, reputation, and livelihood were gone. As people filed out of the hearing room, I caught Jenna's eye one last time. She looked at me with an expression of pure hatred, mouthing words I couldn't hear but could easily understand. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just relief that the truth had finally been exposed and that her victims could begin to heal. Outside the hearing room, Sarah Bouchard approached me with a satisfied expression. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for your courage in reporting this misconduct. Cases like this are difficult to prosecute without someone willing to come forward with evidence. What happens now?" "Criminal charges will be filed within the next few weeks. There will likely be civil lawsuits from the victims. Dr. Ardell's professional life is over." As I drove home through the December afternoon, I thought about consequences and accountability and the difference between justice and revenge. Jenna had made choices, and now she was facing the results of those choices. The house was quiet when I arrived, full of memories that I now understood differently. But for the first time in months, it felt like my home again. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Saw the news coverage, how are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I typed back. Justice was served. And for the first time since finding that burner phone, I actually believed it.